Supreme Court is debating a Texas case that could decide a ban on bump stock.
That's the argument with bump stocks. All they do is allow you to pull a trigger many times faster than a human normally can.
Supreme Court will consider a challenge to a Trump-era ban on so-called bump stocks.
And there's concern that they could be much more dangerous if the wrong person gets the hands on them.
Those are accessories to semi-automatic rifles that increase the rate of fire.
Gun owner is arguing, and I think this is a pretty compelling argument in this Supreme Court.
The Supreme Court is hearing arguments on the Trump-era ban on bump stocks today.
Supreme Court debates bump stocks. On Wednesday, the Supreme Court addressed whether the Trump administration's ban on bump stocks was constitutionally warranted in the aftermath of one of the worst mass slayings in American history. The law, which prohibits the sale and possession of bump stocks, devices that allow semi-auto arms to fire at speeds equivalent to mash guns, appears to have divided the justices mostly along ideological lines. Several people expressed concerns about the long-term repercussions of a reversal. The Second Amendment's guarantee to keep and bear arms is not at stake in this case. Rather, it is only one of multiple barriers designed to limit the jurisdictions of regulatory authorities, specifically the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. One of the few arm control proposals to receive significant attention was the ban on bump stocks, which gained political support following the 2017 Country Music Festival massacre in Las Vegas by a gunman stationed on the 32nd floor of a hotel room. At first, Justice Department officials argued that Congress must act before the executive branch may criminalize the accessory. However, it eventually changed its mind and imposed a ban of its own.
The Supreme Court is debating a Texas case that could decide a ban on bump stock.
Gun owner says, wait a minute, the ATF doesn't have that power to change the law like that.
And there's concern that they could be much more dangerous if the wrong person gets the hands on them.
Because we don't know what exactly states and the federal government can prohibit people from owning.
The question at hand is whether a bump stock meets the legal definition of a mash gun. If the court rules that a bump stock may be used to transform a pistol into a mash gun, it may be illegal and subject to harsh ATF regulations. During their shorter than 2-hour arguments, the judges appeared to struggle with grasping how arm triggers function and the advantages of a ban for both arm owners and the wider public. Intuitively, I am completely sympathetic to your position, Justice Amy Coney Barrett informed the government's attorney, Brian H. Fletcher. Well, it appears that this is operating in a manner similar to that of a mash gun. She did, however, wonder why Congress had not created rules that directly targeted these kinds of gadgets. One of the court's most conservative judges, Neil M. Gorsuch, appeared to agree. Although he could certainly understand why these items should be made illegal, he didn't see why Congress should act instead of an administrative authority. It appeared that the remaining conservatives on the court had split. Chief Justice John G. Roberts, Jr., who typically sits toward the center of the court and may be a critical vote in the case, asked only a few questions. This provided no indication of his thoughts. Bump stock legal challenge. The Supreme Court convened to deliberate on the legality of the Trump administration's ban on bump stocks, a controversial issue fueled by the devastating mass slayings that have marked American history. Within the courtroom, a division among the justices became apparent, largely driven by ideological leanings. The liberal justices, aligned in their support for the government's ban, repeatedly highlighted the potential dangers associated with bump stocks. They raised hypothetical scenarios, illustrating how these devices could enable semi-auto arms to unleash a rapid barrage of bullets, amplifying the lethal capabilities of arms. However, Justice Brett M. Kavanaugh expressed skepticism regarding the abrupt shift in the Justice Department's stance on bump stocks. He questioned why previous administrations and prominent figures, such as Senator Dianne Feinstein, hadn't categorized bump stocks as covered under existing statutory language. This discrepancy gave him pause, suggesting a deeper complexity to the issue.
Supreme Court will consider a challenge to a Trump-era ban on so-called bump stocks.
Including the Supreme Court has ever suggested that you got a Second Amendment right to own a machine gun.
The Supreme Court is set to hear arguments in a case that could change gun rights across the country.
The Supreme Court is hearing arguments on the Trump-era ban on bump stocks today.
The federal ban on these rifle attachments. So why is it hearing the case now?
The legal challenge was initiated by Michael Cargill, a Texas arm shop owner who sold bump stocks. Represented by the New Civil Liberties Alliance, a group with ties to conservative causes, Cargill's case aimed to overturn the ban, arguing against what they viewed as an overreach of administrative power. Jonathan F. Mitchell, representing Cargill, argued for the potential benefits of bump stocks, particularly for individuals with disabilities or arthritis. He suggested that these devices could assist such individuals in shooting effectively. However, Justice Sonia Sotomayor challenged this assertion, questioning the necessity for individuals, even those with disabilities, to discharge hundreds of rounds of ammunition rapidly. Several conservative judges, including Samuel A. Alito Jr., Neil M. Gorsuch, and Brett M. Kavanaugh, expressed concerns about the ban's impact on individuals who had purchased bump stocks before the prohibition. They highlighted the potential legal ramifications, including prison time, for possessing or selling bump stocks post-ban. Additionally, they inquired about the fate of those who owned bump stocks in regions where federal appeals courts had overturned the ban. These deliberations encapsulate a broader debate surrounding arm control, regulatory power, and the interpretation of existing laws. The issue extends beyond the technicalities of bump stocks to encompass fundamental questions about the scope of governmental authority, individual rights, and public safety. The Supreme Court's decision will have significant implications for arm owners, regulatory agencies, and the ongoing discourse surrounding arms legislation in the U.S. The case underscores the complexities inherent in balancing Second Amendment rights with the need for effective regulation to mitigate the risks posed by increasingly lethal armory. Debate analysis. The Supreme Court deliberated on the implications of the Trump administration's ban on bump stocks, igniting discussions on legal technicalities, constitutional rights, and practical consequences. Justice Alito raised a pivotal question regarding individuals who had owned bump stocks post-ban, particularly in regions where the prohibition had been overturned. His inquiry about potential prosecution underscored the complex legal landscape surrounding arms regulation. Mr. Fletcher's acknowledgement that prosecution was probable prompted concern from Justice Alito, who found the prospect disturbing. Justice Kavanaugh echoed this sentiment, emphasizing the risk of ensnaring unaware individuals. However, Mr. Fletcher's assertion that the government had adequately notified the public drew sarcastic remarks from Justice Gorsuch, highlighting the impracticality of assuming widespread awareness of regulatory changes among arm owners. The legal debate delved into the historical context of arm legislation, notably the definitions established by the National Firearms Act of 1934 and the Gun Control Act of 1968. Bump stocks had previously evaded regulation, exploiting a loophole in the definition of a mash gun. Unlike traditional mash guns, bump stocks operated by harnessing recoil to simulate automatic fire, circumventing the requirement of a single trigger pull for each shot. The justices grappled with understanding the mechanics and functionality of bump stocks, with Justice Kagan even gesturing to illustrate her comprehension. Ambiguity persisted regarding whether bump stocks fundamentally altered the function of a trigger on semi-auto arms. Technical arguments hinged on interpreting terms like automatically and single function of the trigger within the context of existing arm legislation. Mr. Mitchell advocated for a narrow interpretation of the law, arguing that bump stocks did not meet the criteria for regulation. Justices Jackson and Alito engaged in detailed exchanges with the lawyers, exploring different perspectives on statutory interpretation. Justice Alito leaned towards Mr. Mitchell's stance, emphasizing the absence of direct physical interaction between bump stocks and trigger mechanisms. However, Justice Jackson leaned toward the government's argument, asserting that bump stocks' practical impact on arm operation justified regulation,
Those are accessories to semi-automatic rifles that increase the rate of fire.
Gun owner is arguing, and I think this is a pretty compelling argument in this Supreme Court.
That's the argument with bump stocks. All they do is allow you to pull a trigger many times faster than a human normally.
But there was not a clear answer, and it did not appear clear that they are willing to go there because of the text of the law.
Careful who you associate with. And the NRA says, hey, you know, that's coercion by the state. It infringes on our First Amendment rights.
The technical portions of the debate centered on how the statute was written, particularly on important phrases like automatically and a single function of the trigger. According to Mr. Mitchell, the judges need to interpret the legislation narrowly, which would exclude bump stocks from its application. Judges Ketanji Brown Jackson and Alito questioned the attorneys extensively, seeking their interpretation of the act. Judge Alito seemed to agree with Mr. Mitchell's claim that the restriction went too far because the gadget doesn't really come into contact with or move a rifle's trigger mechanism. Judge Jackson didn't appear to buy that reasoning. She gave the impression that she agreed with the government's contention that the gadget should be outlawed due to its ability to significantly increase an arm's muzzle velocity and capacity for round production. The Supreme Court's deliberations underscored the intricate balance between statutory interpretation, technological innovation, and public safety concerns. The case highlighted the challenges of applying decades-old legislation to evolving arm accessories, exposing gaps and ambiguities in regulatory frameworks. It reflected broader societal debates surrounding arm control, individual liberties, and governmental authority. Ultimately, the Supreme Court's decision would shape not only the legality of bump stocks, but also set precedent for interpreting arm regulations in an era marked by technological advancements. The justices face the formidable task of reconciling legal principles with practical realities, navigating a complex terrain where constitutional rights intersect with public safety imperatives. As the court grappled with these complexities, its verdict would reverberate across legal, political, and social spheres, shaping the trajectory of arms regulation in the United States. That's all for this video, folks. See you next time.